let's go ahead and start with Tom's presentation, and we can try to work this into the Q&A afterward and so forth. And
You can chat.
yeah,
And you are off mute, so you're good there.
Yeah, you might want to mute him.
okay, I'm going to disable talking. Armel's gone. All right, just a moment. Well, okay, everybody, welcome to the Lyceum. I'm Don Albright, the co-host Dan Deffenbaugh, who's winked out. There he is. If you haven't already, enter your Masonic affiliation in the chat window. We don't have a large group tonight. During and after the presentations, post your questions to Tom in the Q&A window. Be aware of your mic and video buttons located at the bottom left of your screen. You may be asked to unmute and turn your camera on when you ask a question. To just get started, I'd like to introduce Tom Hauder, the most worshipful past Grandmaster of Masons in Nebraska, 32nd degree KCCH. Masonic education and Masonic research are Tom's forte. Tonight his presentation is entitled Looking Beyond the Surface, a look at a Jewish method of studying symbology and adapting it to Masonry. Tom, everybody else turn off your cameras and take over.
I'm not sure how to take that. All right, are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Outstanding. Well, and things are going well so far. Okay, what I cannot see while this is going on is the Q&A window, really, but all right, hang on. Okay, now I can. And it's okay that I don't see anybody but you guys, Don, Dan, and Dan. So I don't get
we will let you know if there are any questions that come through the Q&A.
Okie dokie. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Or there's also the chat too. Sometimes people use the chat. So we'll monitor that and then we'll just let you move ahead.
Well, go ahead and answer the questions when you get them, Dan. So
will do.
Because you probably know more about this than I do. But thank you, everyone, for meeting with us on a holiday evening. I know everybody probably would like to be out barbecuing, or maybe you already have been. In any event, as Don pointed out, this is a presentation called Looking Beyond the Surface, and it's about symbolism and exegesis in Masonry. And it was brought about by an article in the winter 2016 edition of the Philalethes Journal, which, if you're not a member of the Philalethes Society, getting this journal, what are you waiting for? Split the cost with somebody else if you think it's too expensive, but it's the best research out there. In any event, in the article, the author Eric Diamond brought up this method that apparently is used in the Jewish tradition for doing exegesis and having discussions and so on. And I found it very interesting because he was trying to apply it to Masonry, but I didn't think he told me enough. So I had to go do some more looking on my own. And so that's where I came up with this thing. And we're going to kind of step through some basics and get some things defined tonight. We're going to find that there's other ways of doing this in other religious traditions. And then we're going to see how this is going to apply to Masonry, I think, anyhow. And I think especially Scottish Rite Masonry, because Pike never wrote anything that was literal and just meant what it said, right? So there's just tons of symbols and tons of text to use for Scottish Rite Masons. And so great thing to start with. So if we look at signs and symbols, these are two actually different things, but they're around us everywhere. And the issue with signs and symbols is there's a lot of interpretation that can go on and probably should go on. And the problem for us as Masons is twofold, really. One, they didn't leave us any notes as to what they were what they really meant. So yes, I understand that in the monitor, it says the beehive is this and so on and so forth. But in reality, oh, hi, Micah. But in reality, every man, and this is the second part that makes it difficult for Masons, every man is allowed to have his own interpretation. This is one of the things, by the way, that drives non-Masons nuts, especially the ones that are trying to take us to task is there is no one expert. And they always like to point at Pike, and it's like, yeah, but right in the front of his book, it says, if you don't believe this, it's up to you. You can believe or not believe anything you want in my book. So these things are all around us all the time, and some we just get used to. Now, one of the things we have to do is figure out the difference between signs and symbols, right? So signs, very easy. They are what they are. There's no hidden meanings. So if I see a red hexagon sign, even if it doesn't have the word stop on it, when I see that sign, when I pull up to an intersection, I know I have to stop. There's no negotiation. There's no hidden meanings. I don't have to sit and philosophize about it. I go, look at that stop sign. And interestingly enough, that's true in just about every country I've been into, that they use that same shape. So you don't even have to learn the language for it. So signs, very simple. Symbols, on the other hand, often, and in fact, almost always represent something other than what they look like. So they're a simple graphic that has a layered set of meanings that goes beyond the obvious. I think a couple of good examples would be the company logos for Toyota and Subaru. You look at those and you think, yeah, that's nice, very zippy graphic. But as it turns out, there's a really long story behind those things. It's really quite interesting, and I'll let you do that investigation on your own. It's out there on the internet. It's pretty easy to find. So this is one of the things where things start getting sticky, because it's always open to your interpretation what you think the sign is about. One of the examples that I'll use probably more than once tonight, because it's such a dramatic one, is the example of the swastika. Now, 99.9% of the people on the street, if you showed them that and said, what is this and what does it represent? They're going to say, National Socialism in early 20th century Germany, and that didn't turn out well for anyone. Right? But in fact, that symbol had been used in certain Asian cultures for thousands of years before that with a very positive meaning. So we have to be careful about the interpretations that we have. So symbols are always everything packed down into a tiny little thing, right? So it's pointing to this larger thing. When we see a square and compass, you think, oh, that's a Mason, maybe. Depending on how you've been exposed to it, you might think, oh, that's a Mason, but that doesn't even begin to explain what that is representing to us that are Masons, right? So although it is part of it, because it has a square that we talk about and a compass, and there's certain things we know we're going to do with them ritualistically, it's just there as a symbol. And so people that aren't in the craft don't know about those sorts of things. In the issue of levels of reality, the easiest way to explain this concept is, think about, you probably have a song or a poem that when you hear it, it evokes a certain full body, emotional mind, heart, spirit kind of reaction. It makes you think about something that happened, either good or bad, or some wonderful event, maybe when you got married, or anything like that, but it can't really be put into words. And so symbols can trigger that in us if they're done correctly. Now, again, going back to our swastika, these things have a tendency to change, and sometimes not for the good. So we have to be careful, and it's going to bring up something else that we're going to look at, and that is the issue of, are they still around, and do I know what they are? It drives me nuts sometimes. I see young people with these tattoos of symbols, and it's like, do you know what that is? And now they just thought it was a great thing. Well, for those of you that are involved in the Rosicrucian end of Masonry, there are a lot of symbols that no longer are used from day to day that really look cool. And I see sometimes tattooed on people, and they don't realize it's an alchemical symbol for one thing or another. So again, symbols have a tendency to move. Now, whoever created it had a certain idea in mind, but we don't necessarily know what it is. And so that's why context is so important when doing symbolism, or even text, exegesis on text, because you have to, I find this one of the interesting things about it, in order to understand or try to understand what they may have meant, what that symbol may have meant to them, you have to go back and look at what was history, what was going on in history during their period of time. What was society like? What was important to people back then? How were they educated? Right? So you have to look at the context of their life when they made that particular symbol up. And we have a lot of that, obviously, for the symbols that we use in Masonry. We have quite a bit of easily accessed history from the 1700s and forward. So we can start bringing some of that in and saying, well, okay, they did it at this point in time. Here's other things that were going on and so on. So here's a real simple one that I don't know, I wish I knew the age of everybody on here, but I'm betting most people probably don't recognize or know what this is anymore. And what it is called a Roman fasces. Now, the fasces is a symbol of judicial power. So the sticks in the bundle represent the people, and they're lashed together with the leather piece, which represents the laws. Now, the axe head has its own story, and I'll let you go look that up because it's a really long, but sometimes the axe head is removed depending on where you're at with if you're carrying your little fasces around. But if you saw somebody with this, you said, oh, that's judicial power. Well, the weird thing is, this symbol is still with us, but I don't think anybody stops to think about it. If you go into any courtroom that was built prior to probably about 1950, 1960, you'll see a lot of these in courtrooms. There used to be certain early 20th century coins that had these on them. And my favorite example is this one, where we see Abe sitting here, and what's on the front of his chair? Notice the axe head is removed. That's important to know. Again, I'll let you go look up the axe head part. But here's a man that, to us, in our history, represents justice and fairness and a tremendous moral aptitude and so on. And so that's why you put those on the front of the chair. So for many people, it's just something interesting on the front of the chair he's sitting in. But for people that like to think a little bit deeper or do the whole process, it tells us something about what they think about this guy. Okay, so I've used this word a couple of times, and I want to just pause here for a second and make sure we're all on the same page about exegesis. It's this great Greek word. We're going to have a couple others tonight too that are a lot of fun. But it's this great Greek word that essentially talks about you're doing interpretation or an explanation of a text or a symbol. Now, oftentimes, in fact, probably more often than not, it's used when talking about religious text, but it doesn't have to be used that way on its own in a dictionary definition. It's just about this issue of looking at things. And this can cover all these things that we have listed here. So this goes back to my issue of context. So meanings, historical background, cultural background, literally geographical background even. Some symbols have a tendency to be the way they are due to where people were living when they made them up. So that's what exegesis is about. Think about it. Here's how I think about it. Exegesis is taking apart your toy. So someone hands you something. Like when I was a kid, I had a terrible problem with this. My parents were not happy, but it's probably why I ended up as an engineer, because if they gave me a toy, I always had to take it apart to see how it worked. I was never very good at putting it back together, but I loved taking it apart because I wanted to know what was inside. What's inside? What makes it work? Why is it this way? That's what exegesis is about. Now, as it turns out, when I got to looking into this, all three Abrahamic faiths have a method for doing this, or had a method for doing this at one point. So it's one of those things that we're going to start with the Jewish method and work our way forward. So this was the original method that was in the article called PRDS, or Pardis, I think. And you'll notice there's 4 Hebrew words, which I will not mangle at this time. I will let you mangle those on your own. I only know how to pronounce one of them, and I hope someone someday will teach me the rest of them. But in any event, this method is a 4-step method that's kind of circular, can be anyway. And like anything, you start with the literal or plain meaning. So what's the literal meaning of what's going on? Bob shot himself in the foot. Well, the literal meaning would be, somebody gave Bob a gun, or he picked one up and he blew a hole in his foot. That's all there is to it. There's nothing else to know. So that's your literal meaning, right? Then you go to the next level where you get into allegorical meanings. Now, allegories are generally stories or poems or pictures or things like that that are trying to get across some moral or often political point. This is the old, what's the moral of the story kind of thing, right? So when we say Bob shot himself in the foot, what we're really talking about was he opened his mouth and said something when he shouldn't have in a meeting with his boss, and now he's, having problems with his career. And this is a generic Bob, no Bob that I know, by the way. Okay. Then in the next level, you get to what's called the interpreted meaning. And this is a little bit deeper. So what do I do with this information? What does this mean to me? What is the point of knowing this moral point that I just figured out in the allegory? And then at the very top, you have the so-called hidden meaning. And this is where the esoteric or mystical kind of stuff typically thought of that you get by inspiration or maybe even revelation. And that's not as far out as you think. I mean, how many of you, I'm guessing all of you, have been sitting in lodge at one time or another and listening to ritual, and you've heard that ritual 1,000 times, but all of a sudden on that particular night, a particular line goes by or something happens, and all of a sudden the light goes on and you go, oh, I get it. Now this means something to me and I know what it means. Right. So that's that sort of thing. These things that come on you in a flash where they become not just something you know mentally, but also something you feel spiritually and in your heart. Now, as it turns out, the very early Christians had something called the fourfold allegorical method. And this is not necessarily anything you do in a row. It's just the various things that they would do. And we'll have to, this is a vocabulary building presentation, so we'll have to get into that. So like everybody else, literal meaning, Bob shot himself in the foot. Okay. Well, you know, it happens. And that's, that's all you can say about it. Now, the next thing is typological meanings. Typology is interesting. This is something that I could only find in Dan Wellendorf, or not, I'm sorry, Deffenbaugh, maybe actually be able to educate me on this, because in looking around this, I was just looking at the three Abrahamic religions. I don't know if anybody else does this or not, but typological thinking is seems to be very specific to Christianity, and it's where you take stuff in the New Testament that happens and you try and connect it to stuff that happened in what the Christians call the Old Testament. Jewish people obviously have a different name for it, but so it's kind of one of those things where you're trying to draw these allegorical connections of Christ's life to things that happened in the Old Testament. Now, they were a very new religion. They were trying to justify and rationalize the things that they were doing. So it kind of makes sense that you would try and look for this to give it some, to give your news stories in your New Testament, your news stories, some meat, some weight, that sort of thing. Then there's the moral or tropological thing. This is, again, now we're back to the old, what's the moral of the story thing? Bob, don't shoot yourself in the foot, or, always assume the gun is loaded, that kind of thing. And then one of my favorite words, because it's just absolutely difficult to say and doesn't tell you anything about itself, anagogical meanings. And this has to do with future events. So heaven, hell, judgment, prophecies, that sort of thing. So they would use these tools in order to look at something, a symbol, a piece of text or something, and derive some meaning from it. Now, the Islamic method is very close to the Jewish method, and that makes sense, considering the history of the area and the peoples and so on and so forth. However, I have some problems with this. So let's go through it. First, like everybody else, literal expression. What does it literally mean? Then there's what is it alluding to? What are the subtleties of that allusion? And then what are the deepest realities? Now, the problem I have with this, I mean, it sounds good on the surface, is that in practice, and by the way, I should back up and tell you this method was used prior to the split between the Sunni and the Shia. So I couldn't determine if anybody was still using this to any great extent since then. Obviously, that split happened a long time ago, but this was kind of the original way of doing it. In any event, I have a very egalitarian outlook on things. And the problem with the Islamic method is each one of these tools is reserved for a certain group in society. So the literal expression, that's for the common folk. Right? The great unwashed get to think about the literal expression. The illusion is for the elites in society, which technically is probably going to mean more often than not people with money. Subtleties are for what's called friends of God, and that's a very complex subject in Islam, and I'll let you go do your own research on that. And then, of course, the deepest realities, these are your prophets. So I don't like the fact that, you only, no, stay in your own pen. You don't get to think about this. You're not important enough. So that kind of shot it for me right there. So the thing is, this PRDS method is probably what I think applies the easiest to Masonry, because it's kind of this chain of events that you're thinking your way through. Now, keep in mind, not everybody gets to every level at the same time in the same place. You may not get past level 1 or 2 or 3, or maybe somebody else has something, but that isn't the point. The point is everybody gets to throw out their various opinions about this, and you can learn from that. And this is very important as well. We don't seem to be able to have reasonable discourse in this society anymore. If you look at social media and network news, it's all or nothing. You either believe the way I do or you're an idiot, kind of thing. And that's no way to go through life. This is how wars and things happen. This is how biases start. But in a situation like this, you're going to sit there and simply accept and respect that other people have other opinions and use that to inform yourself. You don't have to change your opinion, but it gives you something else to think of. This is an exercise. This is like doing an exercise for your body. It's simply an exercise for your mind. So as it turns out, how these things typically work in looking into this, and at the very end, I'm going to give you a website to go take a look at as well. So a PRDS session typically starts with a light dinner, to kind of get used to everybody, little fellowship building there. And then you jump in and you pick something and you start on it. And these things have a tendency to run on forever and ever and ever. And that seems to be the biggest, or the only downside is, can you quit? Because it's so interesting. You keep coming up with stuff and you can keep going back. And keep in mind that if you do it now and do it 6 months from now and a year from now and 2 years from now on the same subject, you're probably going to have different answers. And there's going to be different people there. You think you know what your brothers are thinking about these things. I'll guarantee you, you don't. The more comfortable they get with this, the more you're going to hear. So let's take a look at an example that he used in the article. And this is a wonderful piece of Photoshop, placing this arc here on what is, I presume, is supposed to be Mount Ararat, except they forgot to take the asphalt road out of the background there, but can't have everything. So what's our first level here? Oops, there we go. However you want to pronounce that, the literal level is, it's an arc. Now, in order for you to know that that's an arc, you got to be at least educated enough on these sorts of things to understand how an arc is different from a ship or a boat. But you just literally see it as, this is a specific type of vessel. It carries a lot of stuff, right? Well, the second level up is your allegorical level, right? This is where you get your hints. And for Masons, the symbol of, if you want to understand how this might be a good symbol for Noah's Ark, or a good symbol for Masons rather, you have to know the basics of the story of Noah. So you're going to have to crack the books and go read the whole Noah story. And then you say, oh, maybe now I know what this symbolizes, right? Because remember, allegories are simply a form of extended metaphors. They're trying to get across some abstract idea by using things that you're used to. The third level is where we get to the interpretive level. Now, at the interpretive level, pardon me, you start asking questions like, well, what does Noah's Ark mean to me today? What's that supposed to represent? Is it the preservation of knowledge, for a Mason? Or is it about fortitude and perseverance in the face of stormy times in your life, either physically or mentally, or whatever with your relationships? What is the practical takeaway? So you start trying to interpret this information, or that you may have gotten, or hopefully have gotten, from what you think the allegory is. And then, of course, we get to the last level, which is the hidden meaning. And this one's really cool. I just want to throw a couple things at you. So this word, by the way, is pronounced sod, like rhymes with road. That was the only one I could find a pronunciation for. So, for example, if you're a Kabbalist, if I pronounced it correctly, then the ark is a representation of order emerging from chaos and the survival of the soul after death. However, if you're into what's called Christian eschatology, I'll give you that word in a minute, eschatology, it's a representation as Christ as the Savior. Now, eschatology is this branch of Christian theology where they study end things, right? So the end of the age, the end of the world, the end of God's kingdom. So very broadly speaking, they're looking at, what is the destiny of mankind? So Christian eschatology is a very interesting and very complex subject. So there you are. That was an easy one, right? So let's go to my favorite one here, the acacia. The acacia is interesting, and I want to just go through this quickly, and then when we get to the question and answer period, you can throw in your answers or your ideas as we do this. But again, let's start at the beginning. What is the literal thing? Well, here's the deal. In Hiramaic legend, right, the acacia plant is used to mark the grave of Hiram by the ruffians, and is also used as a way to tip off the workmen that are searching for Hiram that he's buried there because the plant pulled easily out of the ground. So that's what we're starting with, right? Is that little concept and this plant. And by the way, there's tons of different species of acacia. I just thought this was the nicest looking one. Okay, so what's the literal meaning here? Well, it's not too hard to figure out. Plants, things that have been planted recently pull out of the ground easy because they don't have a root system. And particularly acacia, because it's a desert plant, would have had a very deep taproot and would be very hard to actually pull out of the ground. So literally, oh, okay, yeah, it really did. That it gave them away because it pulled out of the ground easy. So is there an allegory here? What could we talk about? So what's the allegorical meaning? Well, to understand that, you have to understand or recognize the importance of acacia in the Jewish tradition. So Exodus, the book of Exodus, is essentially this giant DIY manual to build everything from the Ark of the Covenant to the tabernacle, to the altar in the tabernacle, and so on. And God directs all of this stuff to be made out of acacia. So now that drags up the question, why acacia? So does that mean that Hiram is the Ark of Knowledge because we planted acacia on top of him and that's what they made the Ark of the Covenant out of? And so, right, so now you start thinking, what are they trying to tell us about this? Because it's obviously very important in this tradition, in this story. So there's got to be something more to it. Then you get up to the so-called interpretive meaning. And this one you're gonna really like. So here's where you're going to ask, what does using this plant mean to us in relation to Hiram's position and his concept of what he's doing? Why not some other desert plant? There were plenty of other plants they could use for wood, plenty of other plants they could have planted to mark his grave and so on. So does it have something to do with the length of our lives? How do we apply this to our lives? This is the level where we're asking these sorts of questions. I'm not going to give you any of my opinions, but I will tell you a few things about acacia. And this is one of the things I like about doing this is you have to go do research on stuff. And acacia in Egyptian mythology is associated with the characteristics of the tree of life and the mythology of Isis and Osiris, which some people, some really bad Masonic scholars around the turn of the 20th century and before tried to connect to the development of Masonry. I'll let you research that on your own. But anyhow, acacia plants, very, very important in Egyptian mythology. And then Christians think that Christ's crown of thorns was made from acacia. And some people, some scholars think that perhaps the burning bush that Moses was talking to was an acacia plant. And in this particular area of the world where acacia plants are many and have many different species, they're also used for medicinal purposes. As it turns out, if you smoke this stuff or if you chew this stuff, you can get a pretty decent buzz. So maybe one of the interpretive things is the guys who wrote our ritual were a bunch of stoners. I don't think that's what they were trying to tell us, but it's another piece of information to think about. So all of these things somehow connect to this allegory and somehow connect to why are we using this. Then, of course, we get to the last or hidden level, the sod. And this is interesting to me because acacia was used to make all the most precious things to the Jews during this period of time. I mean, the most precious thing they had, they put in a box of acacia. We haven't found it again yet, but they put it in a box of acacia. So that means, what does Hiram then represent? Is he this precious thing, or is that knowledge for Masons? And given the importance of Hiram in the story, who does he really represent at this time? Now, I'll give you a hint of one road you could go down. Is there's various Christian groups that are very quite anti-Masonic. One of the reasons why is they see the Hiramaic legend as a ripoff of the Jesus story, because there's a guy that dies and we resurrect them, in their opinion. Okay, so does it have something to do with that? The other thing I want you to think about is the people who wrote this stuff, their education would have been in the classics, the Greek and Roman classics. So they stole a lot from that. You can tell that by reading our ritual. They stole a lot from that. And if you haven't, you should probably go get a copy of the Aeneas by Virgil. Don't read the poem. That's hard to do because of the way it's done. Get a prose version, a decent prose translation. It's actually a very interesting story. And in the Aeneas, there are at least a couple places where young men have to go down into the lower world in order to talk to their father to get a secret. Does that sound familiar? Because they need to know something. So maybe they were trying to allude to that sort of thing. I don't know. And that's what's so exciting about this to me is it's this great workout for your mind. Now, what's happening here? What's happening is what's called progressive learning. And Professor Marcus Borg, who's a New Testament scholar, this is the way he talks about progressive learning. And it makes sense to me because we always say Masonry is a progressive science, right? You should be learning a little bit more every time. We even tell people you should be making daily advancement in Masonry, right? Okay, so how does progressive learning work? Well, the stage one is pre-critical naivete. I can't say it, but that's what it is. Okay, and that's where you just take stuff literal. So I hand you some information and you say, yep, that's true. That's all there is to it. Kind of a childlike acceptance. So it's like handing you an object and you think it's solid. There's nothing inside of it to discover, right? It's just a solid element or something. And the problem is most people get stuck here. Unless you really work your Masonry or anything else that you're trying to learn or trying to understand, you can't just take it at face value. Or at least I can't. There are probably people that can apparently, but a lot of people get stuck at this and they can become disappointed with Masonry because they don't get any of the great stuff that we told them they were going to get out of it. Hopefully, if you keep working at it, you get to stage 2 called critical thinking. And the thing about critical thinking is it's an exciting stage, but it's also a very dangerous stage. At the critical thinking stage, what's happening is you're taking what you've been told in the myths and legends of Masonry, and you're gauging that, you're comparing that to your own personal experiences and to modern knowledge. And this can lead to some real disengagement and disappointment with Masonry because you start realizing that, oh my gosh, these guys have a terrible grasp of history, science, and the Bible. Yes and no. One of the things you have to understand about our work, it was written at a time when it was very common in order to write these sorts of things. One, to hide the idea, and two, to do it by taking a small bit of fact. Hiram does show up in the Bible. We can see his name there. But he goes home, guys. He doesn't get killed. He doesn't get buried. He doesn't get raised. He doesn't get moved. None of that happens to him. But it was quite common for them to take a small grain of truth and then build a legend or a myth around it in order to teach something. And that one anchor piece was enough, hopefully, that, it was a context that you could understand, and then you could learn your way into the rest of it. So with luck, if you do this in a group, other people can help you get past this point where you are disappointed and you start realizing, well, there's something else going on here. Yeah, I can't take this. This isn't just actual truth. So, why would they do that to me? Well, because they're trying to tell you something else. And then if you get really lucky and you beat your head against the wall enough, you can get to what's called post-critical naivete. And this is the light bulb moment I was talking about earlier. This is where you start seeing the wisdom or the truths, as it were, that are embedded in anything really, but in our case, Masonic ritual, whether it be Blue Lodge or Scottish Rite, and you start feeling it heart, mind, and spirit. It becomes part of your body. And like I say, to me, that's that light bulb thing where suddenly you go, oh my gosh, that's what they were talking about. And that's what this PRDS method seems to be pushing on people. So why do I want people to do this? Well, first off, this method is so cool, you don't have to be an expert. All you need to do is remember these 4 steps and start a conversation. You can do it by yourself. And if you do, I would recommend keeping a little journal of how you feel about these things, and then go back and check it 6 months or a year later, see if you still feel that way. But it's better as an exercise. If nothing else, you should learn how to have rational discourse with other people, because we don't attack the idea. We don't attack the person. We respect the person and their idea, and we discuss it as to how it may fit within our framework, right? So you have this fellowship, this exchange of ideas, and everybody gets to the different levels at different times on different things. So you may be on level 3 on one thing, level 2 on another thing, level 4 on another thing, and the guy next to you has a completely different set of levels that he's on. And by exchanging ideas, you teach each other, and there's no wrong answers. Remember, Masonry is something that you get to interpret yourself. You have to make it for yourself. So it's a great way to me, it's easier to learn ritual, by the way, too, if I understand what it's about, or if I at least have a feeling for it. It can be done at any time. You can do it for 5 minutes. You can do it for 5 hours. It's up to you. And if you're mentoring someone, especially at the Blue Lodge level, take a break while you're trying to teach them questions and answers and do this with them. Say, hey, what do you think that last thing actually meant? Why, why would we want to do that sort of thing? Because again, the only way this is going to work is if we talk about it. So, of course, knowing better than thousands of years of Jewish tradition, I had to add a step. It's the engineer in me, because I thought the third level here, the inquiry or interpretive meaning, I didn't think it was getting enough attention. And for me, I'm not one of those people of knowledge for knowledge's sake. I have to have an application for it. Now, I'm not saying you have to do it this way. You can do it any way you want. I'm just saying this is the way I think would work. And I've actually done this with people, and it actually works pretty well. And by the way, this graphic is available if you want to use it in your lodge as a PDF. But I added this yellow section up here at the top, application. Is this, whatever it is we figure out about what we're reading or the symbol we're looking at or whatever, is it still relevant today? Is it practical? There's some stuff that's very impractical and definitely not relevant anymore to the society we live in our Masonic ritual, both Scottish Rite and Blue Lodge. How does this affect my life? And how do I internalize this idea? If you have to think about these concepts in order to do them, if you have to be faced with something and then, mumble to yourself and repeat your obligation, I'm supposed to do this, I'm not supposed to do that. Oh, wait a minute, that's on the list of not supposed to do. Never going to work. It has to become part of you. It has to be internalized so that it becomes automatic behavior. And part of what helps that is this sharing of ideas and this examining of ideas and challenging yourself to get better meaning out of things and to move forward. It's a wonderful thing, I think, to do that builds, great rapport amongst people. I think, like I said, especially for Scottish Rite, because of the material that Pike left us, my gosh, you'll never run out of something to do. So I really, really want to encourage you to give this a shot, either on your own or with a small group in your lodge at your next Valley meeting or whatever, and see what it's like. And you can bounce around between things. You don't have to do the yellow part. You don't have to do the green part. You can bounce around and do it however you want, but you're trying to look for these particular chunks that take you from step to step to step. So I put a little instructions on it. Just pick something. You start at the literal. What's the literal meaning? Well, Hiram's dead. Well, okay, but what else could that mean, right? Allow people to express their own opinion and participate, and also allow them not to participate. Not everybody likes to talk in front of a group about things that are very personal to them. And it may take them several sessions before they feel like opening up. So if they just want to sit there and listen, fine, let them do that. But make sure you always include them and give them a chance. And it may take you several times at this before you get anywhere past the first 1 or 2 levels, right? And again, we don't judge. We appreciate a new idea. We take it and compare it to our own idea, and we say, how can I use that information for myself? So again, I want to thank you for coming in on a holiday night. I really appreciate it. I hope this was interesting to you and that we get some questions or comments or whatever, and that you give this a try. One thing before I turn it back over to Don and quit sharing my screen, there's my email address. If there's something if there's a question or a comment or something you want to make that you don't want to share in public, use my email address, that's fine. Or if you'd like me to come to your lodge and give this presentation or help you run a session or whatever, that's fine too. Assuming you're within about 100 miles or so of Lincoln, because that's about my limit for driving at night anymore. So in any event, thank you again, Don. I'm going to turn it back to you as soon as I click on this.
Tom, can I ask that you keep your PowerPoint up in case we can move back, and if there's a question,
oh, sure,
we can move back and forth to it.
Sure, absolutely.
That was Dan, definitely not Tom, or not Don, sorry.
Whoops, dang it. Sorry. I need to jump out of it for just a second so I can put this
Okay.
URL in the chat box.
Okay,
And then I'll be back. How's that sound? So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. Chat. Whoa, where'd my chat box go? Ah, there he is. Oh, and yes, if you just like the presentation, so you can do it yourself, Don.
I'd like to share parts of that. I think within the ambassador program.
There we go. So there's the URL for you guys. You should go look at that website. This is, it's one of the things about the Jewish tradition that I just find fascinating is this, why do I want to say this culture that says you can question and you can discuss and you can talk about stuff. And it's like, wow, that's
well,
great. I didn't grow up with that. I'm sorry, Dan.
Unfortunately, that is a major part of the Christian tradition. We've just come to, Christianity has come to be stereotyped as evangelical and stuck in the literal peshat of, as you talk about the interpretation of scripture. Christianity is also equally concerned with critical thinking. And I would say especially the early church fathers and the Presbyterian tradition today. Can I ask something? One thing I want to say about this, your addition of the yellow square there, actually application falls under interpretation.
Yes, it does.
Interpretation and application can go hand in hand. So in the so-called hermeneutical process of interpreting things, an interpretation doesn't become that until it's applied. And so in that exegetical process, the first idea is to try to figure out what it meant for the people writing the text. And then what does it mean for us? And it's in that interpretation and application. So I would put the yellow right after the dark blue. And then, when you get to sod or to the the more mystical interpretation, sometimes there is no application for that. Sometimes the people who have those mystical insights end up looking like crazy people.
Yeah, and there's a thin line between crazy and prophetic, isn't there?
Right.
One person, and what the difference is, of course, is how much money you have. You're eccentric if you're rich, you're crazy if you're poor.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
But no, I agree with you 100%. And that was the thing that kind of bugged me about the dark blue, the interpretive thing is when I looked at, for example, this website I gave you and some other information that has been generated primarily, obviously from the Jewish tradition. I didn't think they spent enough time. Their interpretive never really quite fully, for me, never fully quite got to, so what do I do with this now? And that seems like an endpoint to me. And again, it's because I'm very left brain. I was an engineer. So to me, I have to have an endpoint.
Right.
So I'll never be a prophet because when I think of stuff like that, I think, geez, you really should quit drinking. So it has to have an endpoint. So I just kind of, and like I say, you can take that out of there. I can move it around. If you want a new graphic, I'll make you a new one. It's just something that I think is important to get into. Typically, at least in the material that I was familiar with or made myself familiar with, this is your midrashic stuff here in the dark blue.
Yeah.
That's where you get the midrash.
Exactly.
And the midrash are fascinating to read because I had this picture of these guys sitting in a room, with a pot of coffee or tea or whatever it was at the time, and just arguing the bejesus out of this kind of stuff and trying to figure out who really knows, no, I'm the right one. But it seems to have calmed down. This system is, I think, a little bit better. As far as your other comment, historically, I agree with you. I guess my problem was my experience of Christianity, and maybe I just got a bum deal. Definitely didn't involve ever questioning what you were told. It was always,
Yeah,
here it
that
is.
is very unfortunate.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have had the scientific revolution or the Enlightenment had it not been for critical thinking in the religious tradition of Christianity.
Correct. But as you know, that's what caused the problem between science and the church, is the church said, quit thinking for yourself. We don't want you interpreting this stuff and figuring things out. And thus the irreligious libertine that we're not supposed to raise. Because some of them became so libertine, originally the meaning of the word, we always think of this as having something to do with poor morals, and it doesn't. The original meaning of the word, a libertine, was somebody that thought with liberty. They didn't follow the church dogma, I think is the correct word. So they started thinking outside, and they started becoming libertines. And that's why you can't just say that you can't raise a libertine. You have to say an irreligious libertine, because as the scientific revolution went on, more and more of these guys thought themselves out of their faith. And
Right.
that was I think that's a sad thing to have happen personally, but that's my feeling about it. So thus irreligious libertine is why we say that. It's somebody that's thinking, that's essentially thought themselves out of the faith. So yeah, it's sad. We've all had different experiences with our own tradition that we were brought up in, and that was mine. So
Yeah, and unfortunately, I hear that from a lot of people. So I'm sorry to have to be an apologist for
no,
the
that's okay.
tradition, the religious tradition I still want to hold on to, because it's often caricatured, and I can understand why, because all we ever see is uh, some of the more sensationalistic aspects of, the evangelist preachers who are wanting more money from you all the time, things like that.
Well, or if you read any history of the Reformation, I mean, come on, people were being burned at the stake, and this isn't a joke. They were being burned at the stake and tortured and all these other things by the church in the name of God, because they had a different opinion than the Roman church.
Mhm.
And you read enough history of the Reformation and the Enlightenment and so on, man, it's scary stuff. It's
Sure is.
surprising we're still here.
And it wasn't just the Roman church, it was also the Protestant church, John Calvin and Michael Servetus.
Yes. Yes,
So, I
exactly.
mean,
They did no better once
right,
they
yeah,
turned right around and did the same thing they were griping about.
exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
now we're off on a
yeah.
different subject.
No,
I'm sorry,
I
but I'm very
know, I
passionate
know.
about that, because it's like nobody can throw stones on this thing. Because although I don't think Calvin and the boys burned anybody at the stake, did they?
Yeah, Servetus, Michael
Oh, they did?
Servetus.
Oh, he
Yeah,
did?
yeah.
Oh, I did not know that. Oh,
And
that is a great
and
piece of new information. Thank you.
yeah, later Calvinists were also, when the Anabaptists came about, they were,
Oh, yeah,
would tie them up and throw them in the river, right? You want baptism? I'll give you baptism.
yeah, yeah.
Adult baptism, that is. It's crazy. I understand completely why people are so frustrated, but for some reason I keep holding on. So
Well, and
anyway,
see, and to me, that's the good thing about this is, again, if you go into it with a concept of we're going to talk about this stuff and there's not a wrong, and I don't attack the person and I don't attack the idea, I can learn something and maybe change an opinion I had that was too narrow because that's all my experience was. But it's not really the truth, because overall there's a different truth out there that circulates around that better describes what's going on.
mhm.
So it's the whole idea of keeping an open mind and being able to think about things, which again, very Masonic. So
Here's
that's why when I saw this, it's like, oh my gosh, this was like built for Masonry.
James Marples has a question. Can you see that?
Yeah, let me read it. Yeah. Oh, okay. If I infer correctly, unlimited. Okay, let me read the question part of it for everybody, because I don't know. I guess not everybody can see this. So James is asking, he's on board with this. He's interested in this, and he's asking, would it be fair to say that levels of symbolism, whether religious or fraternal, is akin to progression by levels, and thus progression by degrees? And yeah, I think that would be another way of putting it. Good insight. If I infer correctly, the limitations of ritualistic knowledge is unlimited. Well, again, just my opinion. I agree. I think it is. And again, just based on my own experience, every time I think I understand what I'm doing in ritual, some time goes by or something happens, and then I learn something new. So, you keep essentially I'm recycling the same thing, but I'm getting something different out of it all the time. So, yeah, I think the knowledge is meant to be unlimited. Oh, somebody cleared his answer. Rats. Wasn't quite done with that, but oh, there we go. And yes, I think that's partly because it's a very personal thing, which is the last part of his question. Is that because it's tied to personal inner feelings and experiences? And I'd have to say yes. Sometimes, there's the joke about supposedly Freud said sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. But I don't think the cigar is just a cigar was what any of the people who wrote ritual for us were thinking about. I think there's very little literal stuff out there because of the time it was written and what they were writing about and so on. It's all just a big puzzle.
Well, if we have no other questions, going once, twice, what have you. Poor James, his laptop key is stuck, he says, so he's unable to communicate.
Oh.
Well, let's talk about next month. The presentation will be made by Dan Deffenbaugh. And Dan, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, actually, it will be very similar. Well, no, it won't be a rehashing of what we've just talked about, but I certainly will talk about sign and symbol, but I want to put them in a greater context of myth on the one hand, then symbol, and then ritual, and talk about how all of those go together, how those work in the religious world, using some background from a scholar named Mircea Eliade, and then how that gets adapted into Masonry. And we'll talk about signs, we'll talk about symbols, but prior to that, we'll also talk about myth, which is the larger context, the narrative in which those symbols are embedded. So this could be a two-part series, actually. I don't know if I'll do quite as well, but we'll see.
Oh, I suspect you'll do much better and correct some of my mistakes. I mean, I don't have, and that's the kind of stressful thing for me. It's like, oh crap, Dan's going to be there, and you're an actual educated expert in this sort of thing, and I just went and did my own research.
Everything was fantastic tonight. It was just right down the line. Very well done. Yeah.
And Tom, can a person get a hold of that PowerPoint?
Yeah, I'll email it off to you.
All right, thank you.
When we're done here. And anybody else who wants to just send me an email, I'll send it back to you. Unfortunately, the presentation part of it is not in prose. It's kind of like notes for slides, which you could certainly have if you want. But I suspect that oftentimes my notes only make sense to me. So you may have to make your own notes. But I'll certainly send it to anybody that wants it.
Deputy Dan, do you have anything to offer for the good of Masonry?
I have nothing, but thank you so much, Tom. I really enjoyed
Welcome.
the presentation tonight.
Well, everyone, if there are no other questions, I will proceed to close. So everyone, have a great evening. Enjoy your time off. I hope you had some. And we'll see you next month.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.